The nation had been buzzing for weeks with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest and most dynamic White House press secretary in American history, had accepted an invitation to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live. The announcement alone had set social media on fire. Supporters of President Donald Trump saw it as a bold move, sending a key member of the administration into what they considered hostile liberal territory. Critics, on the other hand, were eager to see the late-night host grill Leavitt in front of a live audience. But Karoline wasn't walking into the lion's den unprepared. The episode was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and as the cameras panned over a roaring audience, Jimmy Kimmel took the stage with his usual swagger. Tonight, he smirked into the camera. "We have a very special guest, the face of the Trumpy White House, a woman who has become as famous for her sharp answers as she is for triggering half of Twitter." Karoline Leavitt. Applause thundered through the room, but there were scattered boos mixed in. Karoline walked out confidently, wearing a crisp white suit, her expression unreadable but poised. She shook Jimmy's hand firmly and took her seat. For the first few minutes, the exchange was civil. Jimmy made a few light jokes about Trump's recent tariffs on European cheese and mocked a White House Easter egg roll. Karoline took it in stride, occasionally chuckling and throwing a few zingers back. But then Jimmy's tone shifted. "So, Karoline," he said, folding his hands and leaning forward, "you've become quite the household name. Press secretary, political lightning rod, and trending hashtag. But I'm curious about something the media doesn't usually ask. Let's talk about your husband, Nicholas Riccio." Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly, but her lips held a faint smile. Jimmy continued, "I mean, the guy married you. How does he survive dinner conversations without a press badge? What's it like living with someone who reports to Trump every day? Is he under 24/7 surveillance by the Secret Service? Or is he just another, Republican trophy husband?" The audience laughed, but it was a nervous, scattered laughter. Even some in the crowd could tell that Kimmel had crossed a line. Karoline didn't flinch. She slowly turned toward Jimmy, leaned in just a bit, and gave a response that would soon go viral across every social media platform. "Let me stop you right there, Jimmy," she said, her voice calm but cold. "You just went from late-night comedian to daytime tabloid gossip. And if you want to question my husband, a private citizen who has served this country with more dignity than most celebrities in this town, then you better come armed with facts, not punchlines." The audience fell silent. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "My husband," she continued, "is a decorated Navy veteran, a cybersecurity expert who's helped defend this nation's infrastructure long before the name Karoline Leavitt was trending on any screen. He doesn't need a press badge to be respected. He's earned that with honor, integrity, and sacrifice. And unlike some folks on late-night television, he doesn't need a writer's room to stand for something." Gasps. Audible gasps. Jimmy Kimmel's face flushed. He attempted to pivot, chuckling nervously. "Whoa, okay, I was just kidding." Karoline leaned back in her seat, her eyes sharp. "No, Jimmy, you weren't. But that's the problem with Hollywood today. You think mockery is substance, and deflection is comedy. Let me remind you, the American people didn't elect late-night hosts to lead them. They elected fighters, patriots, and real leaders. My husband is one of them." The audience, previously unsure, erupted into cheers, some standing, others nodding with admiration. Jimmy tried to steer the interview back to lighter fare, but the tone had shifted irreversibly. Karoline Leavitt had walked into the trap and blown it apart with precision and fire. The next morning, clips of the exchange were everywhere. Hashtags like Sergeant Karoline claps back, and Leavitt versus Kimmel were trending on X, Truth Social, and YouTube. And this was just the beginning. WY Friday morning. The internet was ablaze. Clips of Karoline's fiery response to Jimmy Kimmel dominated every social media feed. Even mainstream networks, reluctant to admit defeat when one of their own was publicly humiliated, couldn't ignore it. CNN ran a heavily edited version of the exchange, framing it as tense. Fox News, however, aired the full clip under the headline, Karoline Leavitt defends husband, destroys Kimmel on national TV. Even people who had never watched Jimmy Kimmel live found themselves watching replays on their phones. On Truth Social, President Trump himself shared the clip with a caption that read, "Our press secretary is tougher than any of these fake news talk show clowns. Great job, Karoline. Mega." But it wasn't just the usual political circles chiming in. Celebrities, commentators, and everyday Americans were picking sides. Megyn Kelly tweeted, "Jimmy Kimmel made a mistake. Don't go after a woman's family when she's 10 times smarter and tougher than you." Karoline handled that like a boss. On the other hand, left-leaning personalities were trying damage control. Joy Behar from The View tried dismissing the incident with a sarcastic laugh. "So now standing up for your husband is considered a clapback. Come on." But even her co-hosts were split. Meanwhile, Nicholas Riccio, the man at the center of the firestorm, maintained a dignified silence. No tweets, no interviews, no statements. He was photographed that Saturday morning, holding hands with Karoline as they exited a diner in Alexandria, Virginia, smiling calmly as reporters shouted questions from across the street. A freelance photographer captured the moment. Riccio, dressed in a plain navy jacket, glanced at Karoline with quiet pride while she looked dead ahead, exuding both elegance and steel. The photo went viral. Memes flooded the internet. One comment at point 1 read, "This is what a real power couple looks like. Not scripted, not pampered, just patriotic." Another, "Kimmel thought he was hosting a comedy show. Karoline brought him a lesson in class and combat." Back in the White House, Karoline resumed her duties as usual, hosting a packed press briefing in the West Wing the next Monday. Not surprisingly, several liberal-leaning reporters tried to bring up the Kimmel incident. "Miss Leavitt, there's growing concern that your reaction on Jimmy Kimmel Live might reflect an inability to tolerate humor or criticism." Karoline smiled, but her eyes locked on the reporter like radar. "I love a good joke. I love freedom of speech. What I don't support is selective humor that punches down at military families or attempts to demean women in public service," she replied. "If people think standing up for one's spouse, especially a decorated veteran, is intolerant, then I'll wear that label proudly." That quote was replayed across cable news for 2 full days. On Tuesday evening, Karoline received a surprising phone call. It was from someone she hadn't expected, Roseanne Barr. "I just wanted to say," Roseanne said in a gravelly voice, "you did good, kid. You told that smug punk exactly what America's been screaming at their TVs for years." Karoline laughed. "Thanks, Roseanne. I just said what I felt." "No," Roseanne corrected. "You said what we felt. Big difference." By Wednesday, Jimmy Kimmel Live saw its ratings dip slightly. Not enough to panic ABC executives, but enough for producers to take notice. Internally, there were hushed conversations about overreaching, audience fatigue, and even whether they should issue a clarification or invite Karoline back. But the damage was done. In homes across Ohio, Texas, and Pennsylvania, battlegrounds where elections are won and lost, Karoline Leavitt was no longer just the sharp-tongued press secretary. She was a wife, a defender, and a woman who stood up for her family on a national stage. and won, and Americans noticed. Inside the sleek glass-walled studios of ABC and Hollywood, things weren't going smoothly. Jimmy Kimmel, usually untouchable in his liberal echo chamber, was fuming behind the scenes. He paced around his dressing room in a white t-shirt and jeans, sipping an espresso with trembling fingers. It wasn't the backlash that annoyed him. It was how unprepared he had been for Karoline Leavitt's precision strike. "She made me look like a jerk," he muttered to his producer, Marcy, "like some smug Hollywood liberal who hates the troops." Well, Marcy hesitated. "You did kind of go after her husband without doing your homework." Jimmy's eyes narrowed. "I'm a comedian. That's my job." "Sure, but the world's changed, Jimmy," she said, choosing her words carefully. "You're not just roasting politicians anymore. These folks, like Leavitt and Riccio, are playing a different game. They're media savvy, they're disciplined, and more importantly, they're backed by a political machine that knows how to weaponize moments like this." Jimmy flopped onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "And what am I supposed to do now?" "Apologize." Marcy looked at him. "Not unless you want to start losing viewers in Michigan and Ohio." Back in DC, Karoline wasn't thinking about Jimmy Kimmel. She was in the Roosevelt Room with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, prepping for a trade summit with South American allies. But between briefings, one of her aides handed her a note that read, "Kimmel's team contacted. They want a follow-up segment, possibly an apology, or even a rematch." Karoline smirked. "No response," she said. "Let the silence make more noise." That same day, The Atlantic published a piece titled, "Karoline Leavitt, the woman who flipped the script on late-night comedy." The article outlined how her takedown of Kimmel had become a watershed moment in the culture war, one where Hollywood snark collided with Midwestern grit. Author Lynette Carr wrote, "When a late-night host mocked, but the damage was done. In homes across Ohio, Texas, and Pennsylvania, battlegrounds where elections are won and lost, Karoline Leavitt was no longer just the sharp-tongued press secretary. She was a wife, a defender, and a woman who stood up for her family on a national stage and won. And Americans noticed. Inside the sleek glass-walled studios of ABC and Hollywood, things weren't going smoothly. Jimmy Kimmel, usually untouchable in his liberal echo chamber, was fuming behind the scenes. He paced around his dressing room in a white t-shirt and jeans, sipping an espresso with trembling fingers. It wasn't the backlash that annoyed him. It was how unprepared he had been for Karoline Leavitt's precision strike. "She made me look like a jerk," he muttered to his producer, Marcy, "like some smug Hollywood liberal who hates the troops." Well, Marcy hesitated. "You did kind of go after her husband without doing your homework." Jimmy's eyes narrowed. "I'm a comedian. That's my job." "Sure, but the world's changed, Jimmy," she said, choosing her words carefully. "You're not just roasting politicians anymore. These folks, like Leavitt and Riccio, are playing a different game. They're media savvy, they're disciplined, and more importantly, they're backed by a political machine that knows how to weaponize moments like this." Jimmy flopped onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "And what am I supposed to do now?" "Apologize." Marcy looked at him. "Not unless you want to start losing viewers in Michigan and Ohio." Back in DC, Karoline wasn't thinking about Jimmy Kimmel. She was in the Roosevelt Room with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, prepping for a trade summit with South American allies. But between briefings, one of her aides handed her a note that read, "Kimmel's team contacted. They want a follow-up segment, possibly an apology, or even a rematch." Karoline smirked. "No response," she said. "Let the silence make more noise." That same day, The Atlantic published a piece titled, "Karoline Leavitt, the woman who flipped the script on late-night comedy. The article outlined how her takedown of Kimmel had become a watershed moment in the culture war, one where Hollywood snark collided with Midwestern grit. Author Lynette Carr wrote, "When a late-night host mocked the spouse of a White House official, he wasn't expecting to be eviscerated with dignity and facts." Leavitt's response wasn't just powerful. It was a masterclass in cultural judo, turning mockery into a moment of pride. In contrast, Rolling Stone published a panicked editorial titled, "Is Late-Night Comedy Dead?" In it, writer Jeremy Fields lamented, "If this is what late night has become, a place where guests deliver mic-drop moments that go viral on conservative Twitter, we've lost the plot." Meanwhile, conservative commentators couldn't get enough. Ben Shapiro did an entire podcast episode titled "Karoline Leavitt Dismantles Kimmel's Leftist Smugness Live." Tucker Carlson aired a montage of Kimmel's most cringeworthy moments, ending with Karoline's face on screen and the caption, "Don't mess with a patriot's wife." Even Elon Musk chimed in on X. Karoline Leavitt gave one of the most effective, fact-based rebukes I've seen on television in a long time. Strength and elegance under fire. As the narrative turned, something interesting began happening. Public support for Karoline, even among some independents, began to grow. Polls conducted by Gallup and Emerson College showed a notable increase in her favorability rating, particularly among suburban women, veterans, and moderate Democrats. What began as an uncomfortable moment on late-night TV had transformed into something deeper. Americans weren't just reacting to her words. They were relating to the values behind them: loyalty, dignity, and the idea that family wasn't fair game in politics. Karoline, true to her instincts, avoided the temptation to bask in the limelight. She declined offers from Fox and Friends, The Megyn Kelly Show, and even an exclusive Sunday sit-down with Maria Bartiromo. "I said what I needed to say," she told her comms director. "The more I talk about it, the more it becomes about me. I want it to be about us, the families who serve, the spouses who stand behind the scenes." But as the nation debated late-night TV, freedom of speech, and the boundaries of public discourse, one thing became clear. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just clapped back at Jimmy Kimmel. She had exposed something much bigger, that IT was a calm Thursday evening when Karoline Leavitt walked up to the podium at the American Patriots for Integrity Gala in Dallas, Texas. The black tie event, originally planned to focus on veterans, healthcare, and national security, was now flooded with cameras and reporters hoping for a statement, a follow-up to the Kimmel controversy. Everyone expected a firestorm, but instead, Karoline delivered a speech that transcended politics and further solidified her place in American hearts. She began simply, "I was invited here tonight to talk about integrity, so let's talk about it not just as a concept, but as something personal." Her voice was steady, her presence poised. "A few days ago, I was on a late-night show. I agreed to appear because I believe in reaching people beyond the usual echo chambers. I believe in conversations that bridge differences. But instead of dialogue, I was baited, not as a press secretary, not as a policymaker, but as a wife." A hush fell over the room. They mocked my husband, a man who served this country honorably, who doesn't chase headlines, who never asked to be in the spotlight. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we've decided that cheap laughs matter more than respect. Karoline paused, locking eyes with several guests in the front row. Veterans, Gold Star families, mothers holding photographs of lost sons. "Let me tell you what Nicholas Riccio is.